The gunshot that killed Amelia's father echoed through the canyon long after his body hit the ground, and she knew in that moment that vengeance would consume her if she let it. She stood at the edge of their small ranch outside White Oaks, New Mexico, watching the dust settle where the outlaws had ridden away, her father's blood seeping into the dry earth of this unforgiving territory. It was August 1878, and the heat pressed down on everything like a heavy hand, making the air shimmer and dance above the scrubland. She was 22 years old, alone now except for the horses in the corral and the few chickens scratching in the dirt near the barn. Amelia Everett had never been one to cry easily, but the tears came now, hot and bitter, streaming down her sun-browned cheeks as she knelt beside her father's body. Thomas Everett had been a good man, a fair man, who had carved out a life for them in this harsh country after her mother died of fever 5 years ago. He had taught her to ride, to shoot, to read the land and the sky, to survive. Now he was gone, murdered over a property dispute with a cattle baron named Silas Merrick who wanted their water rights. She buried him herself that evening as the sun set blood red over the Capitan Mountains, her hands blistering on the shovel handle, her back aching with each scoop of rocky soil. She said the words she remembered from her mother's funeral, her voice steady despite the grief threatening to overwhelm her. When it was done, she stood there in the gathering darkness and made herself a promise. She would not let Merrick take this land. Her father had died for it, and she would honor that sacrifice. But by the next morning, as she sat at the rough wooden table in their small adobe house, trying to figure out what to do next, reality crashed down on her. She had maybe $50 to her name, 3 horses, 24 chickens, and a ranch that needed constant work to keep running. She needed help, but hiring hands cost money she did not have. She needed supplies for the winter, which was still months away but would come regardless. Most of all, she needed to prove to the territorial court that her father's death was murder, not some accident or fair fight as Merrick's men would surely claim. The sound of hoofbeats brought her to her feet, hand moving instinctively to the rifle leaning against the wall. But when she peered through the window, she saw a single rider approaching slowly, hands visible on the reins, clearly not looking for trouble. She watched him come closer, noting the way he sat his horse with easy confidence, the dust-colored clothing that marked him as someone who spent his life outdoors, the wide-brimmed hat pulled low against the morning sun. He stopped a respectful distance from the house and called out, "Miss Everett." "My name is Lucas Graham. I worked with your father a few times over at the Johnson Ranch. I heard what happened, and I came to pay my respects." Amelia stepped out onto the small porch, still holding the rifle but pointed down. She studied him carefully. He looked to be in his mid-20s, with a lean, weathered face that suggested hard work and harder weather. His eyes were a startling blue-gray, clear and direct, meeting her gaze without flinching. There was something about the set of his shoulders, the way he held himself, that spoke of capability and strength without arrogance. "You knew my father?" she asked, her voice rough from crying and lack of sleep. "Not well," Lucas admitted, "but well enough to know he was an honest man. I also know that what happened to him was not right. Merrick's been pushing small ranchers out of this territory for 2 years now, and nobody seems willing to stand up to him." He paused, then added quietly, "I am sorry for your loss." The sincerity in his voice made something loosen in her chest. "Thank you," she managed. "That is kind of you to ride all the way out here to say so." Lucas looked around at the ranch, taking in the corral, the small barn, the vegetable garden her father had been so proud of. "Are you planning to stay on the land?" "I have nowhere else to go," Amelia said, lifting her chin. "And I will not let Merrick drive me off. This is my home." Something sparked in Lucas's eyes, something that might have been respect or admiration. Then you are going to need help. A ranch does not run itself, especially not with fall roundup coming and winter after that. I cannot afford to hire anyone, Amelia said bluntly. I appreciate the concern, but I will manage somehow. Lucas dismounted, moving slowly so as not to alarm her, and walked his horse closer to the porch. Now that he was on foot, she could see he was tall, probably 6 feet or a little more, with broad shoulders and the lean muscle of someone who made his living with his hands. His horse was a beautiful bay gelding, well cared for and obviously valuable. I am not looking for pay, Lucas said. I've got some money saved and I have been thinking about settling down somewhere, maybe starting my own place eventually. What if I help you keep this ranch running, and in exchange, I get room and board and a share of whatever profit we make? It would be a business arrangement, proper and above board. You would still own the land, but we would work it together until you are on your feet again. Amelia stared at him, surprised by the offer. Why would you do that? You do not even know me. I knew your father was a good man, and that is enough. Besides, Lucas added with a slight smile, I do not like bullies, and Silas Merrick is the biggest bully in Lincoln County. If I can help stop him from stealing another family's land, I will consider it time well spent. She wanted to say yes immediately, but caution held her back. She had learned from her father to be careful about trusting strangers, especially in a place where betrayal could mean death. I need to think about it, she said finally. Of course. Lucas tipped his hat to her. I will be staying at the boarding house in White Oaks for the next few days. You can find me there when you have made your decision. He started to mount his horse, then paused and looked back at her. For what it is worth, Miss Everett, you do not have to face this alone. There are still good people in this territory, even if it does not always seem that way. She watched him ride away, his figure growing smaller against the vast landscape until he disappeared around a bend in the trail. Then she went back inside and sat down at the table again, her mind spinning with possibilities and doubts. Could she trust him? He seemed genuine, but so had the men who worked for Merrick before they revealed their true nature. On the other hand, what choice did she have? She could not run this ranch alone, not long term. Winter would be brutal, and if she could not prove the ranch was viable, the bank might foreclose, or Merrick might find some legal way to take it from her. That night, lying in the small bedroom that had been hers since childhood, Amelia made her decision. She would accept Lucas Graham's help, but she would be careful. She would watch him closely, trust him only as far as his actions warranted, and keep her father's rifle close at hand. In the morning, she would ride into White Oaks and find him. The town of White Oaks was bustling when she arrived just after dawn, the main street already busy with freight wagons and riders. The silver mines up in the Jicarilla Mountains had brought prosperity to the area, and the town had grown rapidly in the past few years. Amelia tied her horse outside the boarding house and went inside, asking the elderly woman at the front desk for Lucas Graham. Room 6, up the stairs, the woman said, eyeing Amelia with obvious curiosity. Though I believe I saw him head to the stable a few minutes ago. Amelia found him there, brushing down his bay gelding with careful, methodical strokes. He looked up when he heard her footsteps and straightened, surprise and something else flashing across his face. Miss Everett, I did not expect to see you so soon. I have thought about your offer, Amelia said, coming straight to the point. I will accept it on one condition. This is a business arrangement, nothing more. We work together to keep the ranch running, we split any profits fairly, and if either of us wants to end the arrangement, we can do so with 2 weeks' notice. Agreed. Lucas set down the brush and extended his hand. Agreed. You have my word that I will work hard and deal with you honestly. Amelia shook his hand, feeling the calluses on his palm, the strength in his grip. His hand was warm and steady, and she felt a strange flutter in her stomach that she firmly pushed aside. This was business, nothing more. "Good," she said. "Can you be ready to ride out within the hour? There is a lot of work to do, and we are burning daylight." "I will be ready," Lucas said, and there was something in his smile that made her think she had made the right decision. They rode back to the ranch together, and Amelia spent the journey pointing out landmarks and boundaries, telling him about the water sources and the best grazing areas. Lucas listened carefully, asking intelligent questions that showed he knew ranching and understood the challenges they would face. By the time they reached the ranch, some of her initial wariness had eased, replaced by cautious optimism. "You can sleep in the barn," she told him as they unsaddled their horses. "There is a small room in the back that my father used for storage, but it has a cot and a stove. It should be comfortable enough." "That will be fine," Lucas assured her. He looked around at the ranch again, his expression thoughtful. "First thing we need to do is check the fences and make sure the water tank is full. Then we should take inventory of what supplies you have and what you will need for winter." They worked together through the rest of that day and into the evening, and Amelia found herself impressed by Lucas's competence and work ethic. He did not shy away from the hardest jobs, and he seemed to anticipate what needed to be done without being told. More than that, he treated her as an equal partner, asking her opinion and listening when she spoke. It was a refreshing change from the men who had worked for her father, who had often dismissed her ideas simply because she was a woman. As the sun set, and they sat on the porch eating a simple dinner of beans and cornbread, Lucas said quietly, "Your father built something good here. It would be a shame to let it go." "I do not intend to," Amelia said firmly. "Whatever it takes, I will hold on to this land, even if Merrick tries to force you out, especially then." Lucas nodded slowly, his eyes on the darkening horizon. "Then we had better be ready for trouble." Men like Merrick do not give up easily. The trouble came sooner than either of them expected. 3 days later, 4 of Merrick's men rode onto the property, led by a snake of a man named Cole Brennan, who served as Merrick's foreman. Amelia and Lucas were working on the corral fence when they arrived, and they both stopped working, Lucas's hand moving casually but deliberately toward the gun on his hip. "You are on private property," Amelia called out, her voice steady despite the fear curling in her gut. "State your business or leave." Brennan smiled, but there was no humor in it. "Just bringing you a message from Mr. Merrick, Miss Everett. He heard about your father's unfortunate passing, and he wanted to make you a generous offer for this land. $500, cash money, which is more than it is worth. You could take that money and start fresh somewhere else, somewhere safer for a woman on her own." "I am not on my own," Amelia said, nodding toward Lucas, "and I am not selling. This land belonged to my father, and now it belongs to me. Tell Merrick that." Brennan's smile faded. His eyes flicked to Lucas, assessing him. "Who are you, Cowboy?" "Lucas Graham. I work for Miss Everett." "That's so." Brennan spat into the dirt. "Well, Mr. Graham, you might want to reconsider that position. Men who get in Mr. Merrick's way have a habit of meeting with accidents. Would be a shame if something happened to you. Are you threatening me?" Lucas's voice was soft, almost conversational, but there was steel underneath it. "Just giving you some friendly advice." Brennan turned his attention back to Amelia. "You have got 1 week to think about Mr. Merrick's offer, Miss Everett. After that, the price goes down considerable. You understand what I am saying?" "I understand perfectly," Amelia said coldly. "Now get off my land before I shoot you for trespassing." Brennan laughed, but he and his men turned their horses around and rode away, leaving a cloud of dust in their wake. As soon as they were out of sight, Amelia felt her knees go weak, and she sat down hard on the fence rail. "You did good," Lucas said quietly, coming to stand beside her. "You did not show fear, and that is important with men like that." "I was terrified," Amelia admitted. "Being brave does not mean you are not afraid. It means you do what needs to be done despite the fear." He looked in the direction Brennan had gone, his jaw tight. But he was not bluffing about the danger. Merrick will not stop with threats. We need to be prepared for what comes next. "What do you suggest?" Lucas was quiet for a moment, thinking. "We need allies. Other ranchers in the area who have been pushed by Merrick, people in town who might be willing to stand up to him. We cannot fight him alone, but if we can build a coalition, we might have a chance." Over the next few days, they rode out to neighboring ranches, talking to other families who had felt Merrick's pressure. Some were too afraid to help, but others listened with interest. There was an older rancher named Henry Dawson, who had lost part of his herd to Merrick's men and was eager for a chance to fight back. A widow named Margaret Chen, who ran a small horse ranch with her 2 grown sons, agreed to stand with them. By the end of the week, they had a group of about a dozen people willing to resist Merrick's intimidation. During those long days of riding and planning, Amelia found herself growing more comfortable with Lucas. He was easy to talk to, with a dry sense of humor that could make her laugh even in the darkest moments. He listened when she spoke, really listened, not just waiting for his turn to talk. And when she woke from nightmares about her father's death, she would sometimes see the lamplight in the barn and know that Lucas was awake too, standing watch over the ranch even though she had never asked him to. One evening, as they sat on the porch after another long day, Lucas asked about her mother. Amelia found herself telling him stories she had not shared with anyone in years, about the woman who had taught her to read, who had insisted that education was just as important for girls as for boys, who had filled their small house with laughter and love, even in the midst of hardship. "She would have liked you," Amelia said without thinking, then felt her cheeks heat. "I mean, she always appreciated people who worked hard and kept their word." "I would have liked to meet her," Lucas said, and there was a gentleness in his voice that made her heart beat faster. "Your father, too." They raised a remarkable daughter. Before Amelia could respond, they heard the sound of horses approaching fast. Both of them jumped to their feet, Lucas drawing his gun while Amelia ran inside for the rifle. But when the rider came into view, it was Henry Dawson, and even in the fading light, they could see the blood on his shirt. "They burned my barn," Dawson gasped as he half fell from his horse. "Merrick's men came at sunset, set fire to it and shot at us when we tried to put it out. My wife is safe, but we lost all our winter hay, and I took a bullet in the shoulder." Amelia and Lucas rushed to help him, getting him inside and onto a chair while Amelia fetched water and clean cloths. The bullet had gone through the meat of his shoulder without hitting bone, which was lucky, but he had lost a lot of blood and was clearly in pain. "This is escalating faster than I thought," Lucas said grimly as he helped Amelia bandage Dawson's wound. "Merrick is not waiting anymore. He is making his move." "Then we need to make ours," Amelia said. "Mr. Dawson, can you ride to town tomorrow and file a complaint with the sheriff?" Dawson laughed bitterly. "The sheriff is in Merrick's pocket, has been for over a year. He will not do anything." "What about the territorial marshal?" Lucas asked. "Can we get word to him? He is based in Santa Fe, a week's ride away." Dawson winced as Amelia tied off the bandage. "By the time he gets here, Merrick could have burned out half the small ranchers in the county." They talked long into the night, trying to come up with a plan. Finally, Lucas suggested something unexpected. "What if we beat Merrick at his own game? He is using fear and intimidation to drive people out. What if we stand together and refuse to be intimidated?" If all of us small ranchers work together, watch each other's properties, help rebuild what he destroys, he will realize he cannot break us." "That is easier said than done," Dawson said. "People have families, children. They cannot risk everything." "They are risking everything by doing nothing," Amelia countered. "Merrick will take their land one way or another if they do not resist. At least this way they have a fighting chance." In the end, Dawson agreed to carry the message to the other ranchers. They would organize a meeting at the Everett Ranch in 3 days, and anyone who wanted to stand against Merrick was welcome to attend. It was a risky plan, bringing everyone together in one place, but it was the only way to coordinate their efforts. After Dawson left the next morning, his wound cleaned and bandaged properly, Amelia and Lucas threw themselves into preparing for the meeting. They needed to show strength, to prove that resistance was possible. That meant getting the ranch in the best shape they could, demonstrating that they were thriving despite Merrick's threats. Working side by side from dawn until long after dark, Amelia became increasingly aware of Lucas in ways that had nothing to do with their business arrangement. She noticed the way his shirt stretched across his back when he lifted heavy fence posts, the competent movements of his hands as he worked, the occasional flash of his smile when something went right. She noticed, too, the way he looked at her sometimes, a softness in his eyes that made her breath catch. One afternoon, as they were hauling water from the creek to fill the tank, Amelia slipped on the muddy bank and would have fallen if Lucas had not caught her. His arms came around her waist, pulling her back against his chest, and for a moment they stood frozen like that, his breath warm against her neck. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice rougher than usual. "Yes," she managed, though her heart was pounding. "Thank you." He released her slowly, and she turned to face him. They were standing very close, close enough that she could see the darker ring around the iris of his eyes, the small scar on his chin, the way his lips parted slightly as he looked at her. The air between them felt charged, electric with possibility. "Amelia," he said softly, and the use of her first name sent a shiver through her. "I need to tell you something." "What is it?" He seemed to struggle with the words. "When I offered to help you, I told myself it was just about the land, about standing up to Merrick. But that is not entirely true anymore. I find myself thinking about you constantly, worrying about your safety, wanting to make you smile. I know that was not part of our agreement, and if it makes you uncomfortable, I can leave. But I needed you to know." Amelia's heart felt like it might beat right out of her chest. She had been trying so hard not to acknowledge her own growing feelings, telling herself it was just gratitude or proximity or the aftermath of grief. But hearing Lucas say the words made her realize she had been lying to herself. "You cannot leave," she said quietly. "I need you here. Not just for the ranch, but because I think I am falling in love with you, and that terrifies me almost as much as Merrick does." The smile that spread across Lucas's face was like the sun coming out from behind clouds. "You do not need to be terrified, not of this, not of us." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted, and cupped her face in his hand. His palm was rough with calluses, warm and steady, and Amelia leaned into the touch without thinking. Then he was kissing her, gentle at first, tentative, and she kissed him back with all the pent-up emotion of the past weeks, all the fear and hope and longing she had been carrying alone. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Lucas rested his forehead against hers. "I promise you," he said fiercely, "I will protect you and this ranch with everything I have. You will never be alone again." "We will protect it together," Amelia corrected. "As partners." "As partners," he agreed and kissed her again. The meeting took place on a clear September morning, with more than 20 people gathered in front of the Everett house. There were ranchers and their families, a few shop owners from town who were tired of Merrick's influence, even the local blacksmith who had lost business because Merrick forced everyone to use his own farrier. They stood in a loose circle, talking quietly among themselves, and Amelia could feel the nervous energy in the air. She stood on the porch with Lucas beside her, drawing strength from his presence, and began to speak. She told them about her father's death, about Merrick's threats and Dawson's burned barn, about the choice they all faced. They could give in to fear and lose everything piecemeal, or they could stand together and fight for their right to live and work in peace. "I know it is frightening," she said, looking around at their faces. "I am frightened too, but I am more afraid of what will happen if we do nothing. Merrick will take everything we have worked for, everything our families have built. Is that the legacy we want to leave?" One by one, people stepped forward to pledge their support. They organized a watch system, with at least 2 men riding circuit each night to check on all the properties involved. They agreed to share resources, helping anyone who was targeted by Merrick to rebuild or recover. And they sent a formal complaint to the territorial marshal in Santa Fe, signed by every person present, detailing Merrick's crimes and asking for intervention. It was not much, but it was a start. As the meeting broke up and people headed home, Henry Dawson clapped Lucas on the shoulder. "You picked the right side, Graham, and you picked a hell of a woman to stand with." "I know," Lucas said, his eyes on Amelia as she said goodbye to the last of the visitors. "Believe me, I know." That night, after everyone had gone and they had finished their evening chores, Lucas and Amelia sat on the porch in the darkness, listening to the sounds of the desert night. She was leaning against him, his arm around her shoulders, feeling more content than she had since her father died. "Do you really think this will work?" she asked quietly. "I think we have a chance," Lucas said, "and sometimes that is all you can ask for." 2 weeks later, Merrick made his next move. A group of his hired guns rode through the area, intimidating anyone they could find, destroying property and stealing livestock. But thanks to the watch system, word spread quickly, and each time Merrick's men hit one ranch, neighbors from all around showed up to help. When they burned down Margaret Chen's stable, a dozen men arrived by morning to help rebuild it. When they stampeded cattle from another small ranch, the whole community turned out for a roundup to recover them. Merrick's frustration was obvious. He was used to breaking people through fear and isolation, but the community's united front was something he had not anticipated. Still, he did not give up. If anything, he became more aggressive, more dangerous. The confrontation came in early October, on a cool morning when the first hint of winter was in the air. Amelia and Lucas were moving their small herd to a pasture closer to the house when they saw riders approaching. Not just a few this time, but at least a dozen armed men with Merrick himself riding at their head. Silas Merrick was a big man, tall and broad-shouldered, with iron-gray hair and cold eyes. He sat his horse like a king surveying his domain, and when he spoke, his voice carried across the rangeland. "Miss Everett, Mr. Graham, we need to talk." "We have nothing to say to you," Amelia called back, her hand on the rifle in her saddle scabbard. "You are trespassing." "This land should be mine," Merrick said flatly. "Your father stole the water rights that belonged to my ranch, and I am taking them back." "My father bought those rights legally from the territorial government," Amelia shot back. "If you have a dispute, take it to court." "The court?" Merrick laughed harshly. "Girl, I own the judge, the sheriff, and half the lawyers in Lincoln County. You think the law will help you?" Lucas guided his horse forward, placing himself slightly in front of Amelia. "Maybe not the local law, but we have sent word to the territorial marshal, and he will be very interested to hear about your activities here. Murder, arson, theft, intimidation. Those are serious charges. Something flickered in Merrick's eyes. Uncertainty, maybe, or calculation. The marshal has no proof of anything. We have plenty of witnesses willing to testify, Lucas said calmly, including people you thought were loyal to you but who are tired of doing your dirty work. The marshal should be here within the week, and when he arrives, you will have some explaining to do. It was a bluff, but a good one. They had indeed sent the letter, but they had no way of knowing when or if the marshal would respond. Still, the mention of the marshal seemed to shake Merrick's confidence. He glared at them for a long moment, then wheeled his horse around. "This is not over," he snarled. "You hear me? This is not over." He and his men rode away, leaving Amelia and Lucas alone on the range island. As soon as they were out of sight, Amelia let out a shaky breath. "You think he believed you about the marshal? I think we bought ourselves some time," Lucas said. "But he is right about one thing. This is not over." The next few days were tense, everyone waiting for Merrick's next move. But it did not come. Instead, something unexpected happened. A young man rode into White Oaks and went straight to the sheriff's office, carrying a leather satchel full of documents. By evening, the whole town was buzzing with the news. The young man was Merrick's own nephew, David, who had been working as his uncle's bookkeeper. He had grown disgusted with the illegal activities he was forced to record, and had finally decided to turn evidence over to the authorities. The documents he brought included records of bribes paid to officials, falsified land claims, and even a ledger showing payment to the men who had killed Thomas Everett. The sheriff, faced with undeniable proof of his own corruption, had no choice but to arrest Merrick. By the time the territorial marshal arrived a week later, following up on the community's complaint, Merrick was already in custody awaiting trial. The marshal reviewed the evidence, interviewed witnesses, and declared that charges would be filed not only against Merrick, but against several other corrupt officials who had enabled his activities. It was over. Not quickly, not easily, but thoroughly. Merrick would spend the next 20 years in territorial prison, his vast ranch broken up and sold to pay restitution to his victims. The sheriff was removed from office, and new elections were scheduled. Slowly, painfully, justice was served. Through it all, Amelia and Lucas worked the ranch together, watching as their small herd grew and their land prospered. The other ranchers who had stood with them became genuine friends, creating a community bound by shared struggle and triumph. And every day, Amelia fell more deeply in love with the quiet cowboy who had appeared at her doorstep when she needed help most. It was late November, with winter beginning to settle over New Mexico, when Lucas came to find her in the barn where she was brushing down her mare. He looked nervous, which was unusual for him, and he kept fidgeting with his hat. "Is something wrong?" Amelia asked, setting down the brush. "No. Well, maybe, I do not know." Lucas took a deep breath. "Amelia, we have been working together for almost 4 months now, and in that time, you have become the most important person in my life. I wake up thinking about you, and I go to sleep hoping tomorrow will bring another day of working beside you. I know our arrangement was supposed to be just business, but it has become so much more than that, at least for me." Amelia's heart started to race. "For me too," she said softly. Lucas smiled, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. "I am not good with fancy words, and I do not have much to offer except hard work and a promise to love you for as long as I live. But if you will have me, I would be honored to be your husband." Before Amelia could answer, Lucas walked to the barn door and whistled. A moment later, his beautiful bay gelding trotted over, and Amelia realized with shock that Lucas was offering her the horse's reins. "This is Storm," Lucas said quietly. "He is the best horse I have ever owned, the most valuable thing I possess. I want you to have him as a symbol of everything I am offering you. My best, my all, my heart." Amelia stared at the horse, at the reins Lucas held out to her, at the man she loved standing there waiting for her answer. The gesture was extraordinary, almost overwhelming in its generosity. Storm was not just valuable as a horse but was clearly beloved, Lucas's most prized possession. To offer that was to offer everything. She did not take the reins. Instead, she stepped forward and held out her hand to Lucas, not for the horse but for him, for the partnership and love he was proposing. "I do not need your horse," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I just need you." Lucas looked at her outstretched hand, at the promise it represented, and without a word he took it. His fingers closed around hers, warm and strong, and he pulled her into his arms. They stood like that for a long moment, holding each other in the dusty barn while Storm huffed softly beside them and the winter wind whispered outside. "Is that a yes?" Lucas finally asked, and she could hear the smile in his voice. "That is a yes," Amelia confirmed, then pulled back just enough to look up at him. "But I have a condition. Anything. We keep Storm. He is part of you and I love all of you, including your horse." Lucas laughed, a sound of pure joy that made her smile. "Deal," he said, and kissed her thoroughly. They were married 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the ranch, with all their friends and neighbors in attendance. Henry Dawson stood up as Lucas's best man, and Margaret Chen helped Amelia into her mother's wedding dress, which they had altered to fit. The circuit preacher performed the ceremony on the porch of the house Amelia's father had built, and when Lucas slipped a simple gold band onto her finger, she felt her father's presence like a blessing. The winter that followed was hard, as winters in New Mexico often were, but they faced it together. Lucas moved out of the barn and into the house, into Amelia's bed and her life and her heart. They worked side by side through frozen mornings and long dark evenings, building not just a ranch but a home, a partnership, a love that deepened with every passing day. In the spring, they expanded their herd and planted a larger garden. They built a new barn with space for more horses, because Amelia had decided to try breeding quality stock, using Storm as the foundation. Lucas proved to have a talent for training horses, and by summer, they had people coming from as far as Socorro to buy their animals. The ranch prospered, and so did they. Some nights, lying in bed with Lucas's arm around her and the sound of coyotes singing in the distance, Amelia would think about the day her father died, about how lost and alone she had felt. She had thought her life was over, that she would spend the rest of her days struggling to survive in an unforgiving land. She could never have imagined that tragedy would lead to this, to love and partnership and a future full of hope. "What are you thinking about?" Lucas asked one night, feeling her wakefulness in the darkness. "About how lucky I am," Amelia said. "About how a stranger rode up to my door at the worst moment of my life and changed everything." "I was the lucky one," Lucas said, pressing a kiss to her hair. "I was drifting, looking for something I could not name. Then I found you, and suddenly everything made sense." By the fall of 1879, the Everett Graham Ranch was one of the most successful small operations in Lincoln County. They had built a reputation for quality horses and fair dealing, and their brand was recognized throughout the territory. More importantly, they had built a life together based on mutual respect, hard work, and genuine love. It was in October, a year after Merrick's arrest, that Amelia realized she was pregnant. She told Lucas one evening after supper, watching his face carefully to gauge his reaction. She need not have worried. His expression of shock quickly transformed into a smile so wide and genuine that it made her laugh. "A baby," he said, as if he could not quite believe it. "We are going to have a baby in the spring, if I have calculated correctly." Lucas whooped with joy and swung her up in his arms, spinning her around the kitchen until she laughingly protested that he would make her dizzy. Then he set her down carefully, as if she were made of glass, and placed his hand gently on her stomach. "Hello in there," he said softly. "This is your father. I just want you to know that you are already loved more than I can say." Amelia felt tears prick her eyes. "You are going to be a wonderful father." "I am going to try," Lucas said seriously. "I want to give our child what I did not have growing up. A home, stability, parents who love each other. Everything." The pregnancy was not easy. Amelia suffered from morning sickness well into her 4th month, and as winter set in, the physical demands of ranch work became more challenging. But Lucas was endlessly patient and protective, taking on the heaviest chores and insisting she rest more. Their neighbors rallied around them as well, with Margaret Chen providing advice from her own experiences, and the other ranchers helping with work that needed more hands. In late April of 1880, on a warm spring evening when the desert was blooming with wildflowers, Amelia went into labor. The birth was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next morning. Lucas stayed by her side the entire time, holding her hand, wiping her forehead with cool cloths, whispering encouragement and love. When their son finally arrived, squalling and red-faced and perfect, Lucas cried openly. They named him Thomas, after Amelia's father, with the middle name of Samuel after Lucas's own father, whom he had lost as a boy. Little Thomas Graham came into the world during a time of peace and prosperity, surrounded by love and hope for the future. The months after Thomas's birth were a blur of sleepless nights and endless wonder. Amelia had thought she knew what love was, but watching Lucas with their son opened up entirely new dimensions of emotion. He was a natural father, patient and gentle and endlessly fascinated by every little thing Thomas did. He would spend hours just holding the baby, talking to him in a soft voice, singing old cowboy songs that Thomas seemed to find soothing. As Thomas grew from infant to baby to toddler, the ranch continued to thrive. They hired a young couple to help with the work, giving Lucas more time to focus on horse training while Amelia managed the business side of things. Storm had sired several exceptional foals, and their breeding program was gaining recognition throughout the territory. In 1882, Amelia gave birth to twin daughters, Elizabeth and Grace. The twins were a surprise but a joyful one, and suddenly their house was full of laughter and chaos and love. Lucas had to expand the house, adding more bedrooms and a larger kitchen, and they hired additional help to manage both the household and the growing ranch. Life was not without its challenges. There were droughts and hard winters, sick animals and difficult births, the everyday struggles of making a living from the land. But they faced everything together, Lucas and Amelia, partners in every sense of the word. When times were hard, they leaned on each other. When times were good, they celebrated together. Thomas grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved horses as much as his parents did. By the age of 6, he was already helping in the stables, learning to care for and train the young horses. The twins were more rambunctious, full of energy and mischief, constantly getting into trouble and making their parents laugh. In 1885, the territorial governor visited White Oaks on a tour of New Mexico, and he specifically asked to visit the Everett Graham Ranch, which had become famous for its horses. Lucas and Amelia welcomed him graciously, showing him around the property and introducing him to their children. The governor was impressed by what they had built and by the strong community that had formed around them. "You have done something remarkable here," the governor told them as he prepared to leave. "You have shown that honest work and cooperation can triumph over corruption and greed. You are an example for all of New Mexico." After he left, Amelia and Lucas stood together on the porch, watching the sun set over the land they loved. Thomas was in the corral with Storm, who was getting old now but still magnificent. The twins were playing in the yard, their laughter carrying on the evening breeze. "Can you believe this is our life?" Amelia asked, leaning against Lucas's shoulder. "Sometimes I think I am going to wake up and find it was all a dream." "It is real," Lucas assured her, wrapping his arm around her waist. "All of it. The ranch, the children, us. We built this together and nothing can take it away." "I never thanked you properly," Amelia said quietly. "For that day when you rode up to help me, I was so lost and you gave me hope." "You gave me purpose," Lucas replied. "Before I met you, I was just drifting from job to job, never staying anywhere long enough to put down roots. You gave me a home, a family, a reason to build something lasting." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching their children play and their horses graze in the pasture. The desert evening was cooling, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple and pink. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called and another answered. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you had not come that day?" Amelia asked. "Every day," Lucas admitted. "And every day I thank God that I did. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Amelia Graham." "And you are mine," she said, turning to kiss him softly. The years continued to pass, bringing changes but also stability. Thomas grew into a fine young man who took over much of the day-to-day running of the ranch, allowing Lucas to focus more on training and Amelia to pursue her interest in education. She started a small school on the ranch, teaching not just her own children but those of neighboring families, believing as her mother had that education was the key to a better future. The twins, Elizabeth and Grace, grew into beautiful young women with very different personalities. Elizabeth was serious and studious like her older brother, while Grace was adventurous and wild, always looking for the next thrill. They both loved the ranch and had no desire to leave, though Amelia made sure they knew they had choices, that the world was bigger than White Oaks if they wanted to explore it. In 1890, New Mexico was on the verge of statehood, and the territory was changing rapidly. Railroads were expanding, bringing new settlers and new opportunities. The wild, lawless days of the Old West were fading, replaced by schools and churches and organized government. Lucas and Amelia watched these changes with mixed feelings, grateful for the peace and prosperity they brought, but also nostalgic for the rougher, simpler times of their youth. One evening in the spring of 1892, as they celebrated their 14th wedding anniversary, Lucas surprised Amelia by presenting her with a gift. It was a beautiful leather-bound journal, and inside the cover he had written, "For Amelia, so you can record your stories for our grandchildren." "I want them to know how it was," Lucas said softly. "How you stood up to Merrick, how we built this ranch together, how love can triumph over tragedy. Your story matters and it should be remembered." Amelia was deeply touched. She had never thought of herself as someone whose story was worth recording. But as she looked around at everything they had built, at the children they had raised and the life they had created, she realized he was right. Their story was worth telling, not because it was extraordinary but because it was real, a testament to courage and love and the power of partnership. She began writing that very night, recording her memories of that terrible day when her father died, of Lucas riding up to offer help, of the long struggle against Merrick and the sweet victory of their triumph. She wrote about their wedding, about the births of their children, about the quiet moments and the hard times and all the ordinary miracles that made up a life. As the years passed and the children grew, the journal filled with stories. Thomas married a girl from a neighboring ranch in 1895, and within a year, Amelia and Lucas became grandparents to a beautiful little girl named Clara. The twins showed no signs of settling down, both more interested in helping run the ranch and the school than in finding husbands, and their parents supported their independence. In 1898, Thomas and his wife gave them a grandson, and suddenly, the house was full of children again. Lucas, now in his mid-40s but still strong and vital, delighted in teaching his grandchildren about horses and the land. Amelia watched him with the children and felt her heart swell with love. After 20 years of marriage, she loved him more deeply than ever, grateful every day for the partnership they had built. The turn of the century brought more changes. New Mexico was granted statehood in 1912, and the territory they had known all their lives became a state. White oaks, which had thrived during the mining boom, began to decline as the mines played out, and newer towns with railroad access drew people away. But the Everett Graham Ranch remained strong, an anchor in the changing landscape. By 1915, Lucas and Amelia were in their 60s, slowing down but still active. Thomas and his family lived on the ranch and had taken over most of the management, though Lucas still spent every morning in the stables with the horses. Elizabeth had married a teacher from Santa Fe and moved to the city, while Grace had surprised everyone by falling in love with a traveling photographer and settling in Albuquerque. Both daughters visited frequently, bringing their own children to run and play on the land where they had grown up. One summer evening in 1918, Lucas and Amelia sat on the porch as they had so many thousands of times before, watching the sun set over the ranch. They were both gray-haired now, their faces lined with age, but their hands were clasped together as tightly as on the day they married. "Do you have any regrets?" Lucas asked, his voice still strong despite his years. "Not a single one," Amelia said honestly. "Every choice I made, every hard day we survived, every moment of joy we shared, it all led to this. To you, to our children and grandchildren, to this life we built together." "How could I regret any of it? I feel the same," Lucas said. "When I think about that day I rode up to your door, I thank God I had the courage to offer help. You changed my life in ways I could never have imagined." "We changed each other's lives," Amelia corrected gently. "That is what love does. It transforms us, makes us better than we would be alone." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky. From inside the house, they could hear their grandchildren laughing, the sounds of family and home and continuity. Storm was long gone now, buried in the pasture he had loved, but his bloodline lived on in the horses that still carried the Everett Graham brand. "Tell me again," Amelia said softly, "about the day you decided to come help me." Lucas smiled, recognizing the request for what it was, a desire to revisit the beginning of their story. "I heard about your father's death at the saloon in town. I did not know him well, but I remembered him as a good man, and I felt angry about what Merrick had done. I lay awake that night thinking about you out there alone, trying to figure out how to survive, and I knew I had to do something. What made you offer Storm? That was such a grand gesture. When I knew I loved you and wanted to marry you, I realized I needed to show you how serious I was. Storm was the most valuable thing I owned, but more than that, he was dear to me. Offering him was my way of saying I would give you everything I had, everything I was. I wanted you to know there was nothing I would hold back." "I knew at the moment you held out those reins," Amelia said. I could see in your eyes how much that horse meant to you, and I understood what you were saying. That is why I could not take him. I did not need proof of your love, I just needed you. And I needed you to take my hand instead, Lucas said. That was the moment I knew we truly understood each other, that our partnership would be real and equal. You did not want my possessions. You wanted me, all of me, just as I wanted all of you. They fell silent again, but it was a comfortable silence, full of shared memories and deep contentment. The night grew darker, and the desert cooled, and still they sat together. Two people who had found in each other everything they needed. In the years that followed, as they moved into their 70s, and then their 80s, Lucas and Amelia remained inseparable. They were fixtures at community gatherings, beloved elders whose story of courage and love had become legend in the area. Young couples would seek their advice, and they always gave the same counsel. Work together, respect each other, never go to bed angry, and remember that love is both a feeling and a choice you make every day. Thomas and his wife continued to run the ranch with great success, and the Everett Graham horses remained famous throughout New Mexico and beyond. The school Amelia had started had grown into a proper building in town, serving dozens of children, with a full-time teacher employed to run it. The legacy they had built extended far beyond their own family, touching countless lives in the community. In the autumn of 1925, on a clear October day much like the one when Lucas had proposed, they celebrated their 47th wedding anniversary. All their children and grandchildren gathered at the ranch, along with neighbors and friends from throughout the region. There was food and music and dancing, and Lucas, despite his 81 years, insisted on taking Amelia for a spin around the makeshift dance floor. "You are as beautiful today as the day I met you," he told her as they swayed to the music. "And you are as much a liar," Amelia laughed, though she was pleased. "We are old, Lucas, but we are old together, and that is all that matters." "It is everything that matters," he agreed. That night, after the guests had gone and the house was quiet, they lay together in the bed they had shared for nearly 5 decades. Lucas's breathing was slower than it used to be, and Amelia could feel the frailty in his body that he tried so hard to hide. She knew, with a certainty that made her chest ache, that their time together was drawing to a close, but she did not speak of it. Instead, she moved closer, fitting herself against him as she had done thousands of times before. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. "I have loved you from the moment you held out your hand to me in that barn. And I have loved you from the moment I saw you standing on that porch, brave and fierce and determined to fight for what was yours," Lucas replied. "Loving you has been the great adventure of my life, Amelia Graham." They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other's arms, and when morning came, Lucas did not wake. He had passed peacefully in the night, and though Amelia grieved with a depth that shook her to her core, she found comfort in knowing that he had died as he had lived in recent years, surrounded by love and peace. She buried him in the small cemetery they had established on the ranch, next to where her father lay, and where Storm had been buried years before. At the funeral, people came from all over New Mexico to pay their respects to the man who had stood up to tyranny and built something lasting and good. Thomas spoke movingly about his father's integrity and love, and the grandchildren each shared memories that made people laugh and cry. Amelia stood at the graveside with her children and grandchildren around her, and she thought about the long journey that had brought her to this moment. She had started out as a frightened young woman alone on a failing ranch, had found love and partnership and purpose, had built a family and a legacy that would endure. The grief was real and sharp, but so was the gratitude. She had been given 47 years with a man who loved her completely, who had been her partner in every sense of the word. How many people could say that? She lived for another 3 years after Lucas died, remaining sharp and active despite her advanced age. She spent her time with her grandchildren and great-grandchildren, tending her garden and finishing the journal Lucas had given her so many years ago. She recorded everything, all the stories of their life together, so that future generations would know what their love had been like. On a warm spring morning in 1928, Amelia Everett Graham passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 92. She was buried beside Lucas, and the whole community mourned the passing of a remarkable woman who had helped shape the character of their region. At her funeral, her oldest granddaughter read from the journal, sharing the story of how Lucas had offered his best horse, and Amelia had offered her hand instead, and there was not a dry eye in the crowd. The ranch continued under Thomas's management, and eventually passed to his children and grandchildren. The Everett Graham brand remained a mark of quality for generations, and the story of Lucas and Amelia became the founding myth of a family that would spread throughout the Southwest. Their descendants would include ranchers and teachers, doctors and lawyers, artists and business people, all of them carrying forward the values of courage, integrity, and love that had been modeled so perfectly by their ancestors. Years later, when the old house was being renovated by a great-great-grandchild, they found Amelia's journal hidden in a trunk in the attic. Reading through it, the family rediscovered the full story of Lucas and Amelia, the challenges they had faced, and the love that had sustained them through everything. The journal was carefully preserved and eventually published, becoming a treasured account of life in territorial New Mexico, and a testament to the enduring power of love and partnership. In the end, the story of Lucas Graham and Amelia Everett was not just about romance, though there was plenty of that. It was about two people who found each other in desperate circumstances and chose to build something beautiful together. It was about courage in the face of intimidation, about community standing together against injustice, about the daily work of making a life with someone you love. It was about a man who offered everything he had, and a woman brave enough to take his hand without a word, trusting in the promise of partnership and love. Their legacy lived on not just in the land they had nurtured or the horses they had bred, but in the model they had provided for how to live with integrity and love. Every couple who worked together through hard times, every community that stood up to injustice, every person who chose courage over fear was, in some small way, carrying forward what Lucas and Amelia had started on that desperate day in 1878 when a cowboy rode up to a grieving woman's door and offered his help. The ranch still stands today, though much changed from the small operation Lucas and Amelia built together. The house has been expanded and modernized, the barns rebuilt and updated, but the spirit of the place remains the same. Visitors who come to see the historic property often remark on the sense of peace they feel there, as if the love that was poured into the land by its founders has somehow seeped into the very soil. And in the cemetery on the hill overlooking the ranch, two headstones stand side by side, weathered by more than a century of New Mexico sun and wind. The inscriptions are simple. Lucas Graham, 1844–1925, beloved husband and father, and Amelia Everett Graham, 1856–1928, beloved wife and mother. But those who know the story understand that the simplicity of the markers belies the richness of the lives they represent, the depth of the love they shared, and the legacy they left behind. On summer evenings, when the sun sets over the Capitan Mountains and paints the sky in shades of gold and crimson, it is easy to imagine two figures sitting on the porch of the old house, hands clasped together, watching the day fade into night. In those moments, the past feels close, and the story of the cowboy and the woman he loved seems not like history but like something eternal, a reminder that true love transcends time and that the choices we make in moments of crisis can echo through generations, shaping the future in ways we can never fully anticipate but can always hope will be good.